Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in your life when God pulls back the curtain and shows you the invisible battle attacking your mind, your body, and your destiny. What I'm about to reveal will shock you, not to shame you, but to free you. Because the same Holy Spirit who taught me to pray for the sick also exposed the silent habit that steals a man's strength, weakens his confidence, clouds his spirit, and destroys his purpose without him even knowing it. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes chains will break, clarity will rise, and you will see what heaven showed me, truth that will transform your body, your mind, and the fire of your calling. There comes a sacred moment in a person's life when the noise of the world fades long enough for the whisper of the Holy Spirit to be heard. And it is in that whisper that the true journey of healing begins. I discovered that praying for the sick was never meant to be an act of pressure, fear, or uncertainty, but a divine partnership with the one who knows every cell, every thought, and every hidden pain within the human body. The Holy Spirit does not teach through force. He teaches through stillness, through moments where the heart opens wide enough to receive the truth that healing power is not stored in our hands but flows through our surrender. I learned that the first requirement for praying for the sick was not boldness, not eloquence, not confidence, but a willingness to step aside and allow heaven to work. Every time I approached someone with trembling hands and a heart unsure of what to say, the Holy Spirit gently reminded me that it was not my words that healed, but His presence moving through me. There is a supernatural clarity that comes when you realize you are only the vessel, a carrier of divine energy rather than the source of it. And that realization removes fear. When you understand that you are not responsible for performing the miracle, but simply obeying the voice of God, something inside you shifts, and prayer becomes a flow rather than an effort. Healing is a divine current, a spiritual river that only requires a channel, and the Holy Spirit teaches you how to keep that channel open, clean, and sensitive. The more I leaned into His voice, the more I saw that the real miracle was not what happened around me, but what was being transformed within me. What many never understand is that the authority to pray for the sick does not fall upon you like lightning. It grows through intimacy, quietness, and the discipline of listening deeply to the Spirit of God. I learned that praying for the sick starts long before you lay a hand on anyone, because the preparation happens in the secret place where your thoughts, emotions, and intentions are aligned with heaven. The Holy Spirit began to teach me that healing flows easily when the heart is uncluttered, when the mind is not burdened by doubt, and when the spirit is fully yielded. In those early moments, I found myself wrestling with my own insecurities, questioning whether I was worthy or capable, until the Holy Spirit gently dismantled those fears one by one. He showed me that doubt is not defeated through effort, but through intimacy, through staying close enough to His presence that fear cannot survive. Slowly, I learned to shift my attention away from what I felt and onto who He is, because healing power is never about us. It is always about Him working through us. When I understood that, my prayers became lighter, freer, and more filled with expectation, because I was no longer trying to convince God to move. I was aligning myself with what He already desired to do. The Holy Spirit taught me to step into moments of prayer with a heart that is expectant but surrendered, bold yet gentle, confident yet humble. It is this balance that unlocks the flow of healing, because the Spirit responds to humility, obedience, and pure faith. One of the most transformative lessons the Holy Spirit revealed to me was that healing is not merely the restoration of the body. It is a restoration of identity, hope, and spiritual alignment. When I prayed for the sick, I realized that the human body often carries wounds. The eyes cannot see wounds of fear, trauma, exhaustion, and spiritual heaviness. The Holy Spirit taught me to look beyond symptoms and into the deeper places where pain hides, because true healing must touch the soul as much as the flesh. I began to sense when someone carried a broken spirit, when their body was sick because their heart had been burdened for too long. And in those moments, the Holy Spirit would guide my words like a gentle river. He taught me to speak life, to speak peace, to speak restoration, and to allow the atmosphere of the Spirit to do what no human hand could do. Sometimes the miracle was instantaneous. Other times it was a gradual unfolding, a process that reflected God's tender approach to the human soul. But in every moment, I saw the Holy Spirit work with precision, wisdom, and compassion, addressing not only what was visible, but what had been hidden for years. This understanding changed the way I prayed, because I realized that healing is not an event. It is a spiritual encounter where heaven meets the deepest places of a human life. As I continued to grow in this divine assignment, the Holy Spirit taught me one more profound truth. Healing power increases as self fades. I realized that the more my ego dissolved, the clearer his voice became, and the stronger the flow of his presence felt when I prayed. The Holy Spirit is attracted to humility, to brokenness, to those who understand that without him they can do nothing. When I stood before the sick with a heart emptied of self-importance, the atmosphere around me changed. It became charged with a holy electricity, a tangible presence that felt like heaven drawing near. I began to see that healing was not about dramatic moments or emotional displays. It was about alignment with the divine frequency of God's love. Every time I aligned myself with that love, miracles unfolded naturally, effortlessly, beautifully. And in those sacred moments, I understood that the Holy Spirit was not only teaching me how to pray for the sick, he was teaching me how to walk in his presence, how to listen with spiritual ears, how to perceive with spiritual sight, and how to become a living instrument of his compassion on earth. There comes a point in every person's life when they must confront the truth that the greatest battles are not fought in the world around them, but in the chambers of their own mind. The Holy Spirit began to show me that the strength of a person's prayer life, the clarity of their spiritual vision, and the authority in their voice are all shaped by the hidden habits they carry inside. Every pattern we repeat, whether small or great, becomes a seed that grows into either spiritual power or spiritual weakness. The mind is a garden, and whatever you water daily will eventually dominate your life, your behavior, your energy, and your identity. When your habits are scattered, your focus becomes fragmented, and a fragmented mind cannot hear the whisper of the Spirit with clarity. I learned that spiritual authority does not come from shouting loud prayers or quoting powerful words. It comes from a disciplined mind aligned with divine truth. The Holy Spirit taught me that when a person fails to manage their thoughts will eventually manage them, controlling their emotions, reactions, and decisions. And it is in those moments that one realizes habit is not just a physical routine, it is a spiritual force shaping destiny. The more I understood this, the more I recognized that transformation begins not with willpower but with surrender. The Holy Spirit revealed that many people experience spiritual dryness not because they lack faith, but because their daily habits drain the very energy their spirit needs to stay strong. A person can pray for hours, but if their habits contradict their prayers, their spirit feels divided and weakened. The mind cannot flourish when it is constantly entertained, overstimulated, and distracted by impulses that pull it away from purpose. I began to understand that self-discipline is not a harsh restriction. It is a spiritual protection that guards the mind from becoming a battlefield of confusion. The strongest believers are not the loudest. They are the ones who protect their inner world with intentional discipline. I realized that the Holy Spirit cannot fill a heart that is consumed with chaos, nor can he guide a mind that refuses to silence its own noise. When a person allows distractions to rule their day, their spiritual perception becomes dull, their prayers become mechanical, and their relationship with God becomes distant. But when they begin to break the cycles of unhealthy habits, they create room for clarity, room for divine guidance, room for spiritual growth. And in that room, the Holy Spirit speaks with a clarity that changes everything. One of the most life-changing lessons the Holy Spirit impressed upon me was that habits do not simply affect behavior. They affect identity, confidence, and spiritual sensitivity. A person who is controlled by impulses becomes a person who doubts their own authority, because the Spirit knows when the mind is not aligned. You can speak words of faith, but if your habits contradict that faith, your spirit senses the inconsistency, and your confidence begins to weaken. Every time a person surrenders to a habit that diminishes their energy, they lose a piece of their spiritual boldness. And the Holy Spirit began to show me that this is why many feel distant from God, not because God is far, but because the mind has become cluttered with patterns that dim spiritual awareness. When you take control of your habits, you are not just becoming disciplined, you are reclaiming authority over your mind. And a disciplined mind becomes an instrument heaven can use with precision, clarity, and power. The more I embraced this truth, the more I felt my prayers deepen, my faith sharpen, and my spiritual awareness heighten. The Holy Spirit also taught me that breaking unhealthy habits is not about shame. It is about alignment. Many people stay trapped because they fight their habits with guilt instead of understanding. But guilt drains energy while understanding builds transformation. When I finally understood that habits are simply repeated thoughts and behaviors that have gained momentum, the process of change became less intimidating. The Holy Spirit showed me that the moment a person interrupts a pattern, they weaken it. And every time they replace it with a higher thought, they strengthen a new direction. Spiritual discipline is the daily act of choosing alignment over impulse, purpose over pleasure, calling over comfort. When you begin to choose differently, even in small ways, the atmosphere within your mind shifts, and heaven begins to respond. I learned that the Holy Spirit does not expect perfection, He desires willingness. And in that willingness, strength begins to grow day by day, until the pattern that once controlled you loses its power completely. As I continued to grow, I realized that a disciplined mind is a magnet for divine revelation. When your habits support your spiritual journey, your mind becomes clear enough to receive insights, instructions, and discernment that others overlook. You begin to sense things before they happen, understand things before they are explained, and feel the direction of the Holy Spirit with unmistakable clarity. This is the power of alignment. It opens the inner ear, awakens the spiritual senses, and positions you to walk in your calling with confidence. The Holy Spirit taught me that when you master your mind, you master your emotions. When you master your emotions, you master your actions. And when you master your actions, you master your destiny. Discipline is not bondage. It is the pathway to freedom, clarity, power, and spiritual authority. And the more a person aligns their habits with the voice of the Holy Spirit, the more they discover that the life they desire is not created through effort, but through alignment. There comes a moment when a person realizes that their body is not just flesh and bone, but a sacred instrument carrying the breath of God, and every choice they make either honors or disrupts that divine design. The Holy Spirit began to show me that the body responds to every thought, habit, and emotional pattern we hold within, and this response shapes our spiritual sensitivity more than we understand. A body weighed down by exhaustion, unhealthy rhythms, or uncontrolled desires becomes burden to the spirit, making it harder to hear God's whisper and respond to His leading. I learned that what we do in secret reflects in our spiritual strength because the body holds memories of every compromise and every discipline. When a person indulges in habits that drain them, they are not just affecting their physical health. They are weakening their spiritual clarity, their emotional stability, and their mental sharpness. The body becomes a mirror of the inner world. When the inner world is chaotic, the body will show signs of that chaos through fatigue, restlessness, or lack of peace. But when the body is honored, respected, and aligned with purpose, it becomes a vessel that magnifies spiritual power instead of resisting it. This understanding became a turning point in my life because I realized that spirituality is not separate from the body. Both walk together on a journey toward divine purpose. The Holy Spirit taught me that many people struggle to grow spiritually not because they lack faith, but because their physical habits drain the energy their spirit needs to flourish. When a person lives without rhythm, without structure, without care for their physical well-being, their mind becomes foggy and their emotions unstable. And a foggy mind cannot perceive divine instruction clearly no matter how much they pray. I began to notice that my moments of weakness were not always spiritual but physical, caused by tiredness, overstimulation, or patterns that robbed me of inner strength. The body cannot function as a temple when it is treated like an afterthought, and the spirit cannot dwell strongly in a vessel that is constantly neglected. The Holy Spirit gently corrected me, teaching me that caring for the body is not vanity, it is stewardship. When you treat your body with honor, you are signaling to heaven that you are ready to carry more responsibility, more power, more clarity, and more divine assignment. And the more I aligned my physical habits with spiritual purpose, more sensitive I became to His presence, His voice, and His direction. I discovered that the body carries emotional weight as much as physical weight, and both must be released for a person to walk in true freedom. Many people suffer in their bodies because they carry unresolved emotions that manifest as tension, fatigue, or inner heaviness. The Holy Spirit showed me that the emotions we suppress eventually express themselves through the body, affecting posture, breath, sleep, appetite, and energy levels. When the heart is heavy, the body slows down. When the mind is stressed, the body tightens. When the spirit is ignored, the body aches. I learned to listen to my body the way I listened to the spirit, because the two often spoke in harmony, revealing where healing was needed. Sometimes the body wasn't sick, it was simply tired of carrying emotional burdens the spirit had not yet released. And when I began to surrender those burdens, the body responded with renewed strength, fresh energy, and a sense of internal lightness I had never known before. Healing became a holistic journey, involving every part of my being working together in unity. The Holy Spirit also taught me that the body thrives on discipline, consistency, and intentional living. A body without discipline becomes a battlefield for impulse, and impulse leads to guilt, shame, and spiritual disconnection. When a person trains their body through small daily choices, rest, nourishment, movement, and restraint, they are not just improving their physical condition, they are strengthening their spiritual authority. Discipline awakens clarity. Clarity awakens spiritual power. The more disciplined I became in my physical habits, the easier it was to pray with focus, worship with depth, and hear God with sharpness. The body is designed to support the spirit, but it cannot support the spirit when it is weakened by unhealthy rhythms. Every act of discipline sends a signal to the spirit saying, I am ready to partner with you. And when the body and spirit walk in agreement, a person becomes unstoppable in their purpose. As I surrendered more deeply to the Holy Spirit's guidance, I realized that the body is not an obstacle, but a partner in spiritual destiny. The more I honored it, the more I felt heaven trusting me with deeper revelation, stronger faith, and greater assignments. I began to understand that miracles flow more freely when the vessel is prepared, not just spiritually but physically. A clear mind, a rested body, and a disciplined routine make a person more available to the movements of God. And this awareness transformed the way I lived, because I saw that every choice mattered. Every habit shaped my calling. Every decision influenced my sensitivity to God. The body became a living testimony of the work God was doing inside me, and its strength reflected the strength of my surrendered spirit. There comes a moment when a person must face the truth about the hidden habits that quietly steal their strength, their clarity, and their spiritual authority. And the Holy Spirit began showing me how deeply self-control affects every area of a person's life. Many think their struggles are physical, but the real battle lies in the unseen places where impulses are entertained and discipline is neglected. Every repeated habit shapes the atmosphere of your mind, and that atmosphere determines whether you walk in confidence or confusion. When a person lives in a cycle of self-indulgence, they begin to feel distant from their purpose, not because God moved away, but because the habit created a fog over their spiritual perception. I learned that the true danger of uncontrolled desires is not merely what they do to the body, but what they do to the mind, draining focus, scattering energy, and weakening self-belief. A person who loses self-control slowly loses their sense of direction, and the Holy Spirit revealed that this lack of direction becomes the doorway through which doubt enters. It is not the act itself that destroys purpose, it is the dependence, the secrecy, and the slow erosion of inner strength. And when inner strength fades, prayer becomes heavy and passion becomes dull. The Holy Spirit made me understand that every time a person gives in to an unhealthy cycle, they give away a piece of their power, their confidence, and their spiritual sharpness. This is why so many feel unworthy when they try to pray. They sense the internal conflict of wanting God but feeding habits that pull them away from Him. The guilt becomes a weight on the chest. The shame becomes a barrier in the mind, and the spirit becomes hesitant to rise in authority. But the Holy Spirit does not reveal this to condemn. He reveals it because He desires freedom, clarity, and alignment for every person. I saw that the enemy does not need to destroy a person publicly. He only needs to weaken them privately, because private weakness eventually becomes public struggle. When the mind is controlled by impulse, it loses the ability to focus deeply, think clearly, and hear God purely. But when a person begins to break the cycle, even in small steps, fog starts to lift, and their spiritual senses begin to awaken again. The Holy Spirit wants to restore not just holiness but wholeness, not just purity but power, not just restraint but identity. I discovered that the body and spirit communicate in ways we often ignore, and the body reacts strongly when a person becomes trapped in repetitive indulgent habits. The energy decreases, motivation fades, and a subtle heaviness settles inside, affecting the way a person thinks, moves, and prays. This heaviness is not just physical, it is emotional and spiritual because the mind becomes tired of fighting the same battle over and over again. The Holy Spirit taught me that breaking the cycle is not just about stopping an action, it is about reclaiming authority over the body, retraining the mind, and healing the emotions that drive the habit. Many people try to change the behavior without addressing the loneliness, stress, boredom, or emotional wounds fueling it. But the moment a person begins to heal the root, the pattern begins to lose its strength. I learned that true transformation begins when the spirit becomes stronger than the desire, and that strength grows through connection with God, not through willpower alone. The Holy Spirit does not shame the broken. He empowers them to rise above the cycle that once controlled them. There was a point when I realized that the most shocking effect of lack of self-control is not what it does to the body, but what it steals from destiny. A person cannot walk confidently into their calling while secretly battling a habit that drains their emotional and spiritual strength. Confidence becomes fragile, decisions become uncertain, and vision becomes blurred. And when vision is blurred, the future becomes blurry as well. The Holy Spirit began to show me that self-control is not a punishment, it is a protection, a shield that guards the mind from fragmentation and the spirit from dullness. When a person masters themselves internally, they become unstoppable externally. The energy that was once wasted on cycles of indulgence gets redirected into creativity, purpose, and spiritual growth. The mind becomes clearer, the emotions steadier, and the spirit more sensitive to God's leading. And slowly, the person begins to feel alive again, stronger, lighter, more connected, and more capable of fulfilling their calling. As I walked deeper into this revelation, I realized that the Holy Spirit desires to restore strength where weakness once lived, purpose where confusion once ruled, and alignment where distraction once dominated. Self-control is a divine strategy, a spiritual weapon, and a pathway back to clarity. When a person regains mastery over their desires, they regain mastery over their destiny. The very habit that once drained them becomes the testimony that strengthens them. The guilt that once weighed them down becomes the fuel that lifts them higher. And the Holy Spirit begins to flow through them with a new intensity, because the vessel is no longer divided. The moment a person chooses discipline over desire, alignment over impulse, and purpose over secrecy, heaven begins to respond. And in that alignment, miracles become natural, clarity becomes normal, and spiritual authority becomes a way of life.